Good evening, everybody. I think at least this afternoon, at least for everybody. Good evening in probably a few places on the East Coast. Welcome back to our third session of the Keck Science Meeting 2020. We have two talks from the two observatory directors that we usually hear from at these meetings. Hilton will give his kickoff meeting in the middle of the day just to equalize the time zone pain, and he and John O'Mara will talk for about 15 or minutes or so, and then leave some time for questions. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A section of Zoom. If there's anything left over, we can put those into Slack, but please focus on putting your Q&A into Zoom. I will flag Hilton and John down sort of towards the end of their order 20 minutes, 18 to 20 minutes. So we will have time for questions. We'll then hear about Subaru from Director Yoshida, and then we'll have one science talk from Science Murphy. So Hilton, take it away.
Okay, well, good to be with everyone again for our first virtual Keck Science meeting. It's a little hard to realize that at this point we've sat through order 500 Zoom meetings each, so it's been quite a trial. So I want to start speaking about COVID and what the observatory's response to that has been. So the lead is Keck is back on Sky and doing science. The situation is that most of our headquarters staff are still working from home, and we have some restrictions or some significant restrictions on our summit presence. But nevertheless, we are able to prepare for observing every day and carry it out every night. And in fact, the 2020 A and B science schedule has been maintained since we restarted operations in late May. And we've been able to do that without interruption at all and with all the instruments that were promised. Even though quite recently we had a cryo delivery crisis just to make things a little bit more special. So I really want to give a shout out to all the Keck staff who've made all of this possible and to those in the community who've helped support us through this situation. I thought I'll give you a quick idea of the timeline that we went through. So back in early March, Keck actually we sent our staff home before it was mandatory in the state, just prior to the first cases showing up on the Big Island of Hawaii. In late March, we went to a mode we called level 5, which is where we only protected the observatory and its equipment. So we had a skeleton crew going up a handful of times a week to make sure we did cryofills and essential maintenance, but no observing. And then in early May, we were permitted to restart observing. We were classified as a low-risk business, but we had very restricted operations, only certain instruments and a minimal day crew to support that. But towards the middle and end of May, we were able to get first Keck 2 and then Keck 1 back on Sky, and we've been in that situation ever since. And in fact, in early June, we dropped our internal classification to level 3, which means we can observe, we can send people to the summit. We have a limit right now of 14 people per day, and we're running that crew 7 days a week. So it means we can do the basic stuff to support observing, but getting the big projects integrated and commissioned is a challenge. And so we're not quite where we want to be, but from a pure science perspective, things are going well. There have been some impacts, particularly on the time domain astronomy program we've had. We in fact disabled all TOOs for the first 4 weeks that we resumed science operation. And then in mid-June, we restarted them, but with limitations. And those of you who've applied know them pretty well. But basically, we can't do an instrument change. There's no last minute triggers, and observers have to prepare in advance, including the pajama mode preparations. These are the TOO observers, I mean. Nevertheless, we've carried out several, and we are looking to find ways to increase that if we can find a way to increase our summit staff. In terms of the science performance of the observatory, I would say, first of all, in raw output, papers per year, we're pretty much where we always are. For the last year, it was 307 papers, which is, of course, a very sizable output. But as you can see, it's essentially been flat over a decade. And in fact, the only way we're going to be able to increase those numbers of papers, I believe, is if we can fully exploit our KOA database. And John is going to talk a little bit later about an initiative that's now underway to try and do that. I also want to share a graph that comes from Dennis Crabtree, and many, if not all of you, have seen these graphs that he presents every year on the relative performance of different telescopes on a per telescope basis. And the x-axis shows the median impact per paper. And if you're interested, I can explain afterwards how that's calculated. The y-axis shows the total impact, which is just the median impact times the number of papers per year per telescope. And then the diameter of the circle reflects the total number of papers, and the color, the browner it is, the more papers you have in the top 10 percentile of the papers from your institution. So no surprise, ALMA is the most productive facility, ground-based facility worldwide, with the highest impact, median impact papers, and a very large number of them as well. In fact, if you look to the left, you'll see VLA, which has got the second highest total impact, but that's driven by the number of papers, not the impact per paper. And in fact, many of those papers are not in the top percentile, top 10th percentile. Keck is still in an excellent position with the second highest impact papers on a median basis. We have a significant number of papers, of course, that we are generating. And in fact, where we are relative to all the others, except for ALMA, is exactly where we've been all along. ALMA has increased its impact, but all the other telescopes, particularly the other 8 meters, are exactly in the same relation to where they've been all along. I think Subaru has increased slightly on this graph. So I don't want to belabor this too much, but there's a couple of interesting things to note. One is that really the key to increasing our output, as I said, is proper exploitation of our KOA database. But the key to maintaining our position are the new instruments that you'll hear more about later. And we're operating with some of the very best instruments in the world, but many of them are very old and they need significant refurbishment or they need replacement. I want to show you the observing statistics. The red here is the amount of time we lost to COVID. And so you can see we lost all of April to COVID and we lost half of May to it. But since then, the science output has recovered significantly. We've been fortunate, we've had very good weather. In fact, during the month of April, it was almost perfect weather, so it was doubly painful not to be observing. But as a colleague of mine pointed out, only half of that was dark time, so maybe there was wasn't all bad for those of you who are ELRES aficionados. And you can see right after the COVID, there was a slight uptick in terms of lost time, but that was due to the fact that we had to bring systems back online after they'd been off for about 6 weeks. But I'm very happy with the performance since then. And if we could get increase the number of staff that we can take to the summit, then we could really get our main new programs back online. The instrument usage shows very much the same behavior you've seen over the last several years. There's a small uptick in high-res and NERC2, really driven by exoplanet science, exoplanet research. And I believe the downturn or the pressure on DMOS really comes from the other instruments on Keck 2, on KCWI and NIRES. But there's nothing really dramatic to see there. There's sort of small changes overall. And as we noted, ESI has maintained its demand over the last 3 years. But as you heard from some of the papers earlier today, it still performs in a key niche. I want to bring you up to speed on what's happening on Mauna Kea, but just the very highest level. And I think there's a lot we could talk about here, and I'm open to discussing that in the Q&A or on Slack afterwards. But here's the current situation. We don't have any access issues. We're free to come and go as we need to the summit. And there's no special protocols, there's no issues around which roads we have to use or anything like that. So that's very good. But there are a number of socio-political overtones that have come to the fore over this past year. So first of all, naturally, COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact and it's particularly hit Hawaii hard economically, given that our economy is so dependent on tourists. And so that has led to some reappraisal of the role of astronomy just from an economic point of view. There, of course, has been an increased national focus and sensitivity to issues of racial justice, and that plays into many of the issues that the Native Hawaiians have raised around Mauna Kea. And then finally, it's an election year, and in particular, our county mayor is up for re-election, and that could change the calculations if protests were to resume. As far as the TMT is concerned, I think some of you know there's consideration to submitting a proposal to the National Science Foundation for construction funds for the TMT. And if that happens and it's approved, that will trigger what's called a Section 106 process, basically environmental impact statements, NEPA, NHPA type of processes. And that's a multiple year, 3-year type timescale that must happen before construction can commence. So we don't anticipate any blockade to the summit in that period, although perhaps that could happen as a way to put additional pressure on the TMT. In terms of what our goals are over the next decade, really, first of all, is to continue having unrestricted access to the observatory for the remainder of our current lease, which goes to the end of 2033. We also are working hard now because of the very long timescales involved to get the land reauthorization extended. That's the renewal of the master lease and the subleases that flow from that. And the third focus, which is a significant one, and I'll come back to later, is we're working to continue to build our community business and government support, really so that astronomy can get back to thriving and continue to thrive for the decades ahead on Mauna Kea. So that's kind of the top level picture of what we're doing. Now, I want to turn it over to John, our chief scientist, John O'Meara, and who's going to talk about the major projects underway. So over to you, John.
Great. Thank you, Hilton. So it's been the time through COVID and various other things have been pretty stressful and trying on our staff, but we've managed to make a number of significant achievements here at the observatory and with our partners. The first I want to highlight is the successful completion of an absolutely critical project at Keck, which was the segment repair project. We identified some micro cracking in some of the segments and undertook a campaign to repair all of 84 segments that we have here at the observatory. And this is over a 5-year effort. And we can announce the successful completion of this project and the fact that it is definitely a success. Looking at some of the first repaired segments that went back into use, reinspection shows that there are no new cracks. So not only have we repaired them, but we've made them resilient. And this problem, if left unaddressed, would have been a very serious problem that could have threatened the viability of the observatory. So I want to give a huge shout out to the team shown in this picture and throughout the observatory that completed this major enterprise. KCRM. So we've heard a couple of things already about the KCWI instrument, and KCRM is the extension of KCWI out to 1 micron. KCRM is in a very high rate of development right now. You can actually see some of the optics in the figure here that are going to be incorporated into KCRM. One that I'd like to highlight, which I find quite interesting, is up in that middle there under the pointer, under the red dot. That's the dichroic for KCRM, which will separate into the blue channel, which is KCWI, and the red channel, which is KCRM. That was made by Asahi, and that is the largest single element dichroic ever built. And this is a truly amazing piece of optics. The throughput on it is above spec. It's a really exciting piece of hardware. But we've got gratings coming in. We've got camera lenses coming in. We've got detector work ongoing, and I'll come back to the detector work because there's some Herculean efforts going on over at Santa Cruz and detectors. In fact, some of the detector work during COVID was performed in a very California manner, that is in people's garages, because they couldn't get into the labs. But KCRM is progressing. We're beginning to integrate a lot of those pieces. And the other flagship that's in rapid development right now is KPF, the Keck Planet Finder. What's being shown here, you should just pay attention to all the green that's on this. Everything that's green is things that have actually been happening. You may know about KPF. If you don't, it's sort of the successor to HiRes for ultra precision radial velocity techniques. And its superpower is that the entire optical bench is made out of the same material we use for our primary mirrors, this zero door material. And the zero door blank, which serves as the foundation piece for KPF, has been cut, and parts of it have been sent out to SHOT for detailed milling. That's a major, major milestone for this instrument. And I'll also point out that KPF was the recipient of MSIP funding from the National Science Foundation. So KPF is now fully funded at full spec and is making very significant progress to be delivered to the observatory. Andrew Howard, who's one of our co-chairs here, is the PI on that. KPF is going to be installed in the basement of Keck instead of on the NASDAQ like for high res. And so for those of you who knew the interferometer and these long and short delay lines that were in the hallway that links Keck 1 and Keck 2 in the basement, those are now gone. So the before and after is the top and bottom images respectively. And so we're clearing out those delay lines because KPF will go into the basement to be thermally and vibrationally isolated. And this is a big effort to take out all of those pieces. Let's see, advance, please. Schedule-wise, right now the teams are doing the fabrication and assembly in lab. KPF will be delivered in a very different state than KCRM. KCRM will be delivered in a manner where we have to take KCWI off, bring it down, and put the pieces of KCRM into the KCWI enclosure. So that means KCWI will be taken out of service during that period of time. And the integration for both of those instruments is slated to begin in the 21B semester, and commissioning for the instruments in 22A. So we should look towards science with both of those instruments in late 22A, early 22B. Right now, the impacts of COVID on both of these instruments are minor, but it's something where all of the teams are very interested in. We're taking very careful looks at all the potential impacts, known and unknown, on schedule. But right now, this timeline represents where we're thinking the instruments are going to be at. KAPPA, which I believe is getting a breakout session, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, is also progressing well. This is another MSIP level funded instrument from the National Science Foundation. Peter Wazinowicz is the PI on this. KAPPA is a dramatic increase in capability for adaptive optics on Keck 1, and it's also doing a lot of work in terms of a robust science program funded by the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. And so we've got a number of postdocs who are being hired at partner institutions. We're doing student training here at Keck, and there's a lot of active work. One piece I'll highlight in a coming slide, but we're working on real-time controlling and wavefront sensing, new tip tilt sensing, PSF reconstruction. There's a lot of stuff going on with KAPPA right now. It's a very exciting time as hardware is being delivered and deployed, in particular the new laser for Keck 1. So we now have two lasers of similar type on Keck 1 and Keck 2. The Keck 1 laser had its new first light on December 13th of 2019, and it was just in time because the old laser decided to die in a fabulous manner just before that. So this is a very happy team pictured here, sipping their apple juice to celebrate the successful use for the first time of the K1 laser. And we're really looking forward to the new capabilities that KAPPA are going to bring. And just to highlight what it means in terms of STrail, the current estimates for STrail as a function of wavelength are shown in blue for the galactic center. This shows the gains by that are expected by KAPPA with the addition of the real-time controller system. And I encourage folks to go to the KAPPA breakout and to find some of the KAPPA experts here on Slack. Hilton mentioned this, and there is a special breakout session for DSI tomorrow, but I want to speak to it really quickly. DSI is the Data Services Initiative, which is really a program that's intended to fundamentally transform end-to-end the way the observatory manages data, from when you can set up your observations to when you retrieve data from the Keck Observatory Archive. NASA has been a major funder for this. We had a recent proposal that was accepted by NASA to help fund this project, along with significant contributions by all of our partners and by the observatory. So this is a multi-million-dollar, $6 to $7 million program. In terms of explicit funding, but it's also significant work on pipeline development. And it has four major goals. The first is to increase our observing efficiency through database-driven observing infrastructure. to increase the science efficiency, both with getting quick look data at time of observation and pipeline reduced data down the line a few days later, or less time than that. A big increase in science yield, because we really want to get more science per minute on the sky. And as Hilton alluded to, this will open up the archive in big ways. Instead of being a repository for real and some processed data, new data coming in through DSI will all be processed, ready for science. And this aligns, I think, very well with NASA's priorities, right? The Science Mission Directorate has new initiatives around open data, and I see Chaz waving at me, I'll be quick. Strategic support for NASA missions is, of course, our reason for the partnership there. And DSI being able to return data quick to the community is in good alignment with that. I want to speak at great length about DSI, and I will if you come join me for the breakout session tomorrow. Very briefly, and we don't have time to go into this in detail, just to remind the community that ELRES, the red side detector, is in sort of a bad state right now. It's in a very non-stable state with one of the amplifiers. And so we are currently in the process of constructing at Santa Cruz a new detector for the ELRES red side, which should be deployed late this year, or delivered late this year or early next year, to mitigate this problem. If you want to talk more about ELRES, please find me on Slack and we can talk about it. But just as a caution for ELRES users between now and the end of the year or early next year, please plan accordingly for having only about half the detector available consistently. DMOS has one detector, CCD5, which is a known issue for those of you who have used DMOS. Recently, that situation is not improved, and we're concerned that surgery would be more dangerous to the patient than the state that it's currently in. But we're actively looking at refreshing the DMOS detector package. But CCD2 also had some problems, but that has been fixed. I want to let the last minute or two go to Hilton for some final thoughts on community efforts.
Okay, Chaz, I actually think this is a 30-minute session, so I don't think we're that pressed for time. Okay, so community support, as I said, is really a key part of our strategy for improving our relationships with the community so that we can work to a bright future for astronomy for the long term. And I want to just highlight one program that we ran recently. It was really in response to the COVID crisis and the huge downturn in employment for so many people. So we had a very serious food shortage or food insecurity issue on the Big Island. And we put together a program with the help of some of our traditional donors, donations from our staff, from some of you, and some of our fellow observatories, called Farms to Family, designed to keep our farms alive and keep people at least getting some food. And so you can see the fundamental statistics. We delivered over 4 tons of food, nearly 15,000 or a little over 15,000 meals, 9,000 food boxes. We provide financial support for some other community programs. Really a fantastic effort, and staffed by volunteer Keck staff using our vehicles to pick up the food and deliver it and participate in the packaging distribution. We had this huge outpouring of help from our staff, and it's had a significant impact, I think, in the community. It really has shown people how deeply rooted we are in this community. Just to show you sort of typical pictures, you can see some Keck staff hiding behind masks over there, but really something that I think we can all be proud of, and made a significant and real difference, and inspired other donors and other institutions to step up as well. In terms of general outreach, of course, COVID has impacted what we can do, but we have banded together with the other observatories to provide some videos featuring astronomy that you can see online if you wish. We've continued with our virtual public lectures. Most recently, we had one that had over 300 people from all over the country participating in. And for those of you who've been tapped and have agreed to speak, I really want to let you know that your efforts are well appreciated and certainly help keep astronomy in people's minds as a positive force. We've kept our visiting scholar, Mauna Kea scholars and internship programs continue, but of course at a somewhat smaller level and not quite as, not on site. And pretty much our school presence is now eliminated. If you're curious, there's a Mauna Kea wide observatory site now called maunakeaobservatories.org, and that features scientific and other work from all the observatories. So finally, I want to just bring you up to speed on a new program initiative that we are putting into place around diversity and inclusion. So these have always been important to us, but our efforts have been pretty much ad hoc. And now we're trying to make a concerted effort to make some real progress in this area. And so I've instantiated an actual program that's being designed right now. It has staff assigned to it. And it's really to improve our ability to attract and retain and develop our workforce so that they can continue to support you and the complex instrumentation and technologies we have. Our initial focus is actually on attracting more kamaina, that's people who are long-term resident in the state or born here, and including native Hawaiians, not just to positions at the observatory, but to professional positions at the observatory. And we also are looking to create more opportunities for women to advance into leadership and senior leadership positions at the observatory. So that's not the totality of the program, but that's at least the initial focus. And my goal and the board's goal here is to model the way for all observatories in Hawaii and perhaps elsewhere in how to create a respectful and innovative work environment that stays faithful to our core values, but it adds inclusiveness and diversity as a strategic objective. So that's the talk I have for you. And of course, now I'm available for questions. And so is John.
Okay, great. Thank you all. I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A bucket. So maybe I'll try to kick it off while some of you think of questions. I mean, one of the important things about Keck is its role as a teaching institution where, people really learned how to operate the instruments, interact with the support astronomers and so on. And obviously we've stopped doing that for the present time. But what do you see as the prospects for observers who want to come to Keck to observe and to learn firsthand? And maybe they, what are the issues associated with quarantine for people coming to visit? If they came to the Big Island, what would they be able to do? And so on.
Well, our baseline assumption is that we're going to be continuing, at least in Hawaii, at the kind of infection rates we're seeing now for a minimum the next 6 months, quite likely 12 months before there's really some sea change to any of this. So that means that we have to preserve our ability to continue to do science. And so we're very cautious. For example, we are rigorous about not allowing or only allowing people to the summit that have an absolute need to be there. And so no visitors, we wouldn't allow our observers to go up. But headquarters, we're a little bit more relaxed about because we have a large facility and many of our people are working from home. I think it's impractical to consider doing it until the quarantine rules are relaxed, which our state is talking about doing in the middle of October, but it will clearly depend on what's actually happening on the mainland. And I would guess that it's going to depend on how successful that program, their testing program is. So my guess is forget about it for 6 months, and probably in 6 months' time, we'll be in a position where we can really welcome people here. But we're certainly happy to work remotely with observers, and that's these programs I mentioned and others. For example, KAPPA has a strong teaching component. Those ones we'll continue to support.
I saw a question on Slack from Jessica Liu. Will the Keck Visiting Scholar program continue through the next year? Right now, we had applications open through it, Jessica. I think the answer is yes. Of course, the program succeeds best when people can be here for at least a significant part of the time there. So there's some changes that are happening with the KVSP. Hilton, I don't know if you want to speak to that. Other than that, the number of scholars we have has been reduced for this year because we want to make sure it's still a quality experience for both the scholar and for the staff. That interaction between the staff and the visiting scholar is a really critical part of it because our staff benefits just as much as the visiting scholar does. And I know we have a couple of visiting scholars at the meeting here who can probably testify to the quality of the program. So our primary goal is to maintain the quality of it. And the safety of everyone. So that means there's going to be fewer people, but we don't intend on stopping the program because of COVID.
Yeah, I would add to that, it's not a financial issue. We have the funds to support it, but the staff who typically act as mentors, the staff astronomers, are under tremendous pressure because of the need to support pajama mode. So I think that's the added constraint for us right now, that we have actually more work amongst the people who actually have to do the mentoring. So that has
Okay.
to cool down a little first.
Okay, we have time for maybe one or two more questions. We have one. Can you provide more details regarding the diversity and inclusion program? We've got that up on the screen now.
Sure. I think the salient issues are have conducted an initial survey about our COVID response, and we're about to unveil one for the staff climate. So that's the very first step, and that will actually take place later this month, I believe. And we'll analyze that data to give us some indications of what we should address first. And I mentioned we've assigned staff. We actually have my soon-to-be former executive assistant, Leslie Kistner, known to many of you, is detailed to that activity. And we have a new human resources manager who comes with a lot of experience in exactly this area, and he's overall responsible for setting up the program. It's a personal priority of mine, so that I can assure you. But at this point, it's early days, and we want to do more than just our ad hoc programs of the past.
Okay, one last question on outreach, then I think we have to shift to the next talk. So for outreach in the schools in Hawaii, elsewhere possibly, what might be possible for the observatory to let people actually either sit in on observing itself, either in person or even remotely? And Thane was writing that he did it in 2017 for some Hilo undergrads, and it was quite well received.
John, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it's something we should definitely explore, especially with the way that Zoom now works with this. It has to be, I think it has to be the right type of observing for it to be something to go on with the school. But I don't see major reasons why it couldn't happen, for example, during my time, but with some coordination with some various people. It's definitely something we can look into. So Thane, I can speak to it more in Slack. One final piece of breaking news informed to me over Slack by Carlos is that CCD5 is now operational on DMOS, thanks to some efforts there. It's in a crippled state, but it is now receiving light again. So that's good news there. But I think we should probably pass it over to Yoshida-san. Hilton and I are both going to be available on Slack to answer further questions.
Okay, thanks to both of you, and people, overflow questions can just go over into Slack.